And so I've allowed my percentage to grow beyond the tithe. And I find great joy in giving. I find it important to give off the top freely, first to my church congregation and then to other ministries that are important to me. And our congregation at St. Andrew's did the same. Just before I arrived, there had been a resolution at one of our synod assemblies that every congregation would give 15% off the top to the work of God through the synod. And St. Andrew's took it seriously. And they began to work toward that 15%. I think they were at like 11 or 12 when I got there. And we got up to 15%. For years we were there. And then one year we dropped it to like 14.5%. And people went along with it because leadership felt that money needed to be squirreled away on something else. And but they weren't happy. And throughout the year they were saying, when we vote again, we're going to vote for that 15% to be back. And they take great pride in giving freely to God and God's work through the synod. They also give another 5 cents on top of that to other specific ministries that they care about in their community and in the world. But that first 15 goes to the church through the synod, to God through the synod, so that God's work might be done. Well, in 2015, we had a real down year. We ended the year $40,000 in the hole. And we saw it coming as leadership. We put together a devotional stewardship campaign where people wrote devotionals, including givers writing about the gifts that God gives them through their giving. But leadership got together and said, well, the $40,000 hole, how can we close this? Well, there wasn't a whole lot that we could cut out. It was either staff or benevolence. And so we talked about this in September, and council prayed. When they came back together, they said in October, well, we're doing stewardship right now. What we think we should do in early November is give a budget with a $45,000 deficit and say to God's people, we'll keep an eye on it. If we continue to have these kinds of deficits, we will adjust after the beginning of the year. But we were also going to have council members get up and give temple talks telling what was going on and saying to people, look, we have this great building mortgage reduction fund. If everybody who gives to that would give half to that and move the other half over into the general fund, we'd have everything we needed for general fund, and we'd have more than enough to pay our mortgage every month. And so we put that challenge out there to the congregation. And then we decided to see what would happen. Well, in some ways, the results were disappointing. The number of people who moved half of their building fund over to the general fund, 2 total. I was one of them. Just 2. On the other hand, in January, we were in the black. In February, we were in the black. I forgot to tell you, we had even raised one of our staff members' salary because we thought, $42,000, $45,000, we're underpaying the staff member. Let's give them the raise, and then let's see what God does with this. It doesn't seem like be that much, but we made it every month, more and more, until they finally in May got rid of one of their biggest expenses when they kicked me off of their roster so that I could come and do this job and be a part of this. But they put their faith and trust in God and said, no, we are not going to not give to God because we're anxious. We're going to trust in God. We're going to monitor this. If we have to do something different, we will. But we're going to give to God first. And that's what I encourage all of your congregations to do, to give to God first. I would encourage every congregation to be at least a tithing congregation. Give 10% off the top to God and God's work as the first check you give each month. Or it might be the very last one, provided that's what you do is add up everything, and before you write another check, the very first thing once you get the month's total is you write that check out to God's work. I would hope that a lion's share of that would go freely to God's work through the synod and to church-wide, to do the things that we need to do together that we cannot do without your help. You've seen the disaster wreaked by Hurricane Matthew. Every dollar you give to Lutheran disaster relief to help people in Haiti and in the southern part of the United States because of the flooding and because of the devastation goes directly to them, because through your church-wide offerings, we have people in church-wide office who distribute and manage and administer those funds. What you give freely makes a difference. I know every now and then I've heard people get angry at something that church-wide has done or that other churches have argued for, and therefore they've decided to cut what they give to the greater church. When you do that, you're cutting off help and hope for people who are in need. I encourage you not to do that, but to give in faith and trust that God's people are at work doing the best they can with whatever you give in order that God's message of hope, of wholeness, of grace, of forgiveness, of justice can be done in the world. And I think what you'll find as congregations is what I found as an individual and St. Andrew's found as a congregation. You give first to God, you be transparent about it, you talk to the people, God comes through. God's economy is different than the world's. The more you give, the more you're likely to get. I want to tell one last story about this. A couple of friends of mine, same guy who blushed when that other guy was talking to him, they interviewed at a congregation, and the congregation was having terrible stewardship problems and didn't have enough money. And this guy and his wife, they're both clergy, a clergy couple, they were asked, what would you do to solve our stewardship problems? And my friend said, well, you're not giving enough away. And they said, no, we have trouble with income. And they said, yeah, you're not giving enough away. First thing you need to do is tithe and see what God does for you. They got the call to that congregation. They put that to work. At the time they got there, the congregation had about 102 people in worship. It was declining. It was in trouble. Today they have more than 400 people in worship. They have 2 separate campuses. One is a real missional outpost to help reach people in an unchurched area in their place. They continue to give the tithe and beyond the tithe first to God because they are completely convinced that God's economy is different than human economy, that God supplies those who give first in faith. So I'd encourage you all to give first in faith to God as well.